Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today, and welcome to today's webinar on this very important topic: future of education in the post-COVID world. My name is Lalit Singh, and I'm the managing director at McGraw Hill in India. And you know, McGraw Hill is one of the leading education brands in our country and has played a crucial role in educating at least two generations of Indians over the last 50 years of its operations in India. So it is pretty much in order for us to lead this discussion today on this very important topic because the ongoing global pandemic and its after effects will surely cause significant impact on our education system, infrastructure, and hopefully on the policies as well. Now, I'm delighted that Professor Rajendra Pratap Gupta has kindly agreed to join us as an expert speaker for today's session. Professor Gupta is a much sought after policymaker who has contributed to policymaking across government, health, education, and economy. He has been contributing to policymaking for over a decade now, and not just in India, but at a global level. He has been working with various governments, including in India and abroad, with several government agencies and multilateral bodies like World Economic Forum, WHO, UNESCO, World Bank, and also several other global organizations. But most significantly, especially for today's discussion, Professor Gupta served in 9-member team that drafted the National Education Polity. So that is something that brings us to the point here. I have been fortunate to have known Professor Gupta for over the last 10 years, and I think Professor Gupta is able to make so much impact as a policymaker because his recommendations are backed by his years of real-life experience and because of his simple and human-centric approach towards policymaking. I have had the good fortune of working with him for 2 books. So the last one being, and both these books have been path-breaking, in the Indian public policy space. The most recent one that I refer to is Your Degree is Not Enough. And this was published by McGraw Hill very recently and has in fact remained as a bestseller on Amazon ever since. And we got a lot of good feedback on that book, and the book is equally liked for its content both by regulators and decision makers in the government space, as well as by common people like you and me. So, as I said, I'm delighted to have Professor Gupta with us today, and we are here to learn, from him on how the education will and should evolve in this COVID era and the post-COVID era, and what all we can do to make an impact on our education system as the country fights out COVID from our country. So, welcome, Professor Gupta. Over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Lalit, and congratulations to McGraw Hill for completing half century in India. It's, I think, a big feat. And I think every viewer on this platform today, I believe that every one of you are healthy, fit. It's a trying time. All of us need to take precautions. So please do make sure that you do follow physical distancing, practice a mask, and do take care. Now, this topic is very daunting today. When I wrote the book last year, I never knew that it would be so relevant and it would fast track many things thanks to COVID. When I wrote the book, I said education for Gen Next. Of course, as a member of the Education Policy Committee, I had the fortune of meeting people right from villages to institutes like IIMs, talking to people on what they envisioned India. Of course, the mandate we had in the policy was to build a policy that would take India ahead. But then I thought I had more flexibility writing a book and putting in detail what all we need to do as a country or probably any country. So it's a very challenging question to say what's the future of education, because I think each one of you listening today, I can say with surety, whether you are a professional, whether you are a person working in the private sector or in the government, each one of us have been impacted. Webinar today is the new norm. And this is going to be the new normal going forward for all of us. So this presentation, I'm going to walk you through what has happened in education, what is happening, and what's the way forward. Will our degrees be enough? Whether we are students of today or we are professionals or we are working in private sector, will this be enough to take us forward? Probably not. What will help us? What is important for us? And how is the world changing? So what I talk here also has a survey of around 113 countries. I'm going to share that as well. So it's not just limited to India. Let me now jump into the presentation straight. So if you look at our education system or the model, or for anyone, whether you are a parent, you're a student, you're a professional. So all of us are overly focused on having a degree. So was I when I was a student. I wanted to get a degree with good grades that would help me get a job. But what is important is beyond. It's education, and those are two disconnected realities. You may have a degree, it may not be enough. And the next thing is knowledge, which is like a way above. And the last thing is wisdom. There is an interesting quote: knowledge is knowing what you say, wisdom is knowing whether to say or not. So if you start from degrees, which is where we have been overly focused on, which is changing thanks to COVID and even otherwise, that these are the levels. When you look at where you stand today or where you want to be, you'll have to look at your life from these four standpoints. For sure, you would have a degree. Does it translate into knowledge to keep you ahead of others? Is it making you wise enough to make the right choices or the right decisions? So let's look at these three great people. Charles Darwin, he was a sailor, but what he did was the theory of origin of species, which all changed the way we look at biology. Gregor Mendel, he was a priest actually. Most of his work was in the monastery's garden. And why I'm making the point is not about giving up education. It is seeing how education becomes knowledge for the world. And of course, the last one, that if you look at the Leonardo da Vinci, he was like a genius. And what was his qualification? Formally nothing. But look at every field he created an impact. Look at these three people: Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Steve Jobs. They all went and probably aspired for good education, but they realized what all of us are realizing today. Thanks to COVID, we have come to a standpoint where we are saying, okay, what I did, will I do the same thing ahead? Is it going to work for me? Is it going to keep my job? Is my degree going to get me a better job or going to retain me? Look at these people when they were at the inflection point where Bill Gates founded his company. Elon Musk, 2 days into his PhD in Stanford, decided to set up a company, and so did Steve Jobs, saying, okay, I could continue with my education, but I think I could make a bigger impact. So I think COVID reminds me that what we say, that people left their schooling or their degrees and jumped to start a company, actually it is more relevant today than ever before. In COVID, we are seeing we are at a standpoint where we'll have to look at what we are doing. Is it enough? Will it be good enough for us to sail through this time post-COVID? And this brings us to many facets and factors of education and the job market. So I'm going to dwell on that. Last year, two changes happened in a span of 2 weeks. That was in the month of October. So far we had always seen that, Jupiter had the highest number of moons. But on 15th October, on 7th October, we realized it was not so. Saturn had more moons than Jupiter. So this happened on the 7th October. Exactly 15 days later, we had the quantum supremacy. So what basically happened was that what calculations you could do with the fastest supercomputer in 10,000 years could actually be done in less than 4 minutes. Now, this brings me to a very interesting point, that we saw this happening in the last year. Our knowledge about the world changed, and the world also changed. Same space we looked at, we figured out they had 20 more moons. So the way we looked at things have changed. Now, this is very relevant when you look at post-COVID. Same sectors, same job markets, you will have to look from a very different standpoint. And that is why these two examples are very relevant. And they also show you how the world has moved. And this brings me to the next point, where people have probably not looked at from an education perspective. And I think we probably did a disservice in not including Moore's law in our education system. It was out in 1965. Gordon Moore was the founder of Intel and is chairman emeritus. He said that the computing power doubles every 2 years. Now imagine if this was taught in schools, our outlook towards things would be very different. We have seen in our practical work that starting from a RAM of maybe MB, it became GB, and then 2 GB, 8, 16 as going forward. So the very fact that computing power is changing every 2 years, and it's not something new. It's 55 years old. It was in form of Moore's law. So I think all of us will have to look at these facets and then look at what is happening to the world. Look at this one, the Buckminster-Fuller curve. It actually came in 1982. I'm not sure why we haven't taught this, but the fact is that our knowledge, which used to double in 500 years, from 1500 to 1900, started doubling at 100 years, 50, 30, 20, and as we are in 2020, it's doubling every 12 hours. In a world where the knowledge doubles every 12 hours, I know that some of you will say that it's not knowledge, it's information. Fair enough. Even if it's that, our information is doubling every 12 hours. In such a world, how relevant are the degrees and the education that we learn where the curriculum changes every probably 5 years, probably 10 years? So I think we all have to look beyond our formal qualifications, our formal degrees. And it is not just students of today. In fact, it is everyone who is out there in the job market, who is a professional, whether you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, everyone will have to look at this Buckminster-Fuller curve. So we are actually changing, the way we look at things. Probably by the time I'm done with my presentation, 5-10% of knowledge information would have been added to the universe. And we are living in such a time. And of course, what happens? People say that our brain is like this size, and how much can we take in? Now, I'll give you a very interesting twist on that. In London, the taxi drivers, they are supposed, before they got a license, they're supposed to memorize the maps of the places, important points, how they will drop, then they would get a license. So the study that was done with the London cab drivers, it shows that your size of brain increases, while they were in the job. So for the number of years they were in the service of driving a cab, dropping passengers, their brain size grew. When they dropped off, it shrank back. This is an interesting study, and it shows that we need to probably exert more. That makes our brain stronger. And the current time when knowledge doubles every 12 hours, I think we have enough to exercise our brain, the mental exercise. So you can relate all this to the way the world is changing. Take things doubling in 12 hours and take the fact that brain does expand with the knowledge and the exercise we build in for the mental work. So this is a very interesting stuff. Now I move to, these are the facts that you saw from history. This is the facts of science. Of course, all these are covered in the book that I wrote. But one thing I did, I do always for all the books, is do a primary research. So I led a study in 113 countries. I wanted to test, is it just India which is behind in terms of education? Are we the only ones shouting that we need to change, or is the same scenario world over? So this is a very interesting study, and it's a global survey on education. So if you look at it, the age groups that we had are, from most of them, 90% are in the working age group. So you had students, you had working professionals, you had people even who are retired. And if you look at what is the highest level of education, if we did a study, we didn't have educated people on that. So for us to question how relevant is education probably would be an incomplete thing. Of course, this study would have its own limited bias because it was done on net with people who have access to internet. And of course, that's a limitation for any author, but we touched 113 countries. So look at the highest qualification. The ones that you see in orange are postgraduates, and the ones you see below that are the doctorate. So we have a fair share of people who attain the highest level of qualification in their studies. So they probably, in my view, of course it's personal, that they are the best judge to tell us how relevant is education for today and for tomorrow. So we also looked at the employment status, like where you are in terms of your employment, and what we see is that we have a fair amount of people who are professionals, majority of them being in full-time employment. So this is across regions. So we asked, what's the role of education? So if you look at, I'm actually not able to see the slide completely, but based on what I have done, I can actually share you that 49% of the people, 48% said that yes, it did impact them, but the larger half said that education solely did not have a major role to play. It was other factors as well. And of course, a minor number of people who were like students or even probably out of job said they had education did not have major role to play. But if you look at this entire study, it is not just your education. 51% or 50 people are saying factors besides your degree or education had major role to play in what they achieved in life. Is our education system preparing children for the future? The answer is an astounding clear no. Almost 74% people saying you they don't prepare the students for the future. And if you look at this from the regional perspective, so we clubbed all the countries into regions. So take the case of UK, take the case of US, absolute majority in terms of saying education does not prepare the children for the future. And when I was writing this book and analyzing this study, I had talks with leading people in every sector. And the fact is that it's not just India, it's even developed and advanced countries like the US, UK, and even European Union that believes that the education system of today is not enough. And this is pre-COVID. Post-COVID, I think the approach of people would have changed a lot more. So what became 67, 77 or 80% probably would have touched today 90% plus. So I think post-COVID, it brings us to a standpoint where we'll have to relook at everything we did and what we need to change. What matters, degree or experience? Now that's a very interesting one. Initially when I did this study, I just wanted to put two questions, two options, degree and education. But then I thought it would be unfair. I should actually put a third one, which is like both. If I just had degree and education, the degree actually got less than 1%. It was actually at 0.64% the people who said only degree matters. Education 23.31 and both 76.05. So if it's only degrees, which actually ended up making the name of my book, Your Degree is Not Enough, people said it's actually not enough in today's time. So outstanding, in terms of very clear answer saying degree is not enough for you today in today's world. That's where we are today. This was a term that I think some of you may be familiar. Those in the corporate world may be familiar. It's called VUCA: volatile, uncertain, ambiguous, and complex. It was a term coined by the American War College in 60s. But look at where we stand today. It was used in corporates at a very high level, saying let's be prepared for a very complex, competitive world. But post-COVID, it's VUCA for everyone. This is where we stand today. And this is interesting. When I was researching the material for the book, one of the analysis that I actually came to as a conclusion was that 90% of the jobs that exist today would either be transformed drastically or would not exist. And of course, there is a limitation of time of how much I can talk on the data here in this presentation, but let me tell you, it's very clearly mentioned that 65% of the jobs which students today who are in school will do not exist. Now that's where the question that comes is the future of education post-COVID. Now, if 65% of the jobs won't exist, what are we teaching them? That's what had brought me to the point of saying the Moore's law and the Buckminster's-Fuller curve or knowledge doubling. So these are pre-COVID predictions, and I must put a rider here that this were done in 2018 and 19. Of course, with COVID, our outlook would have changed. Not the predictions would have changed. In fact, they have fast-tracked. A whole lot of things on technology adoption and automation would fast-track post-COVID, and for obvious reasons. So there was a survey that was done with 500 people, senior executives in Asia Pacific, and they said that they believe that full impact of technology would be felt by 2023. And 85% of the companies, the World Economic Forum surveyed, said that they would actually accelerate adoption of technology by 2021. Now, on the first point, I will say that 2023, you can actually look at probably preponing that by 2 years. So the adoption of automation and technology would be fast-tracked going forward. That is what I think would be the key message I would have, is that going forward we will see a significant shift in the reorientation of roles between man and the machine. And I am going to talk ahead, in the slide about how much would that quantifiable impact would be. Look at these slides. Now, this is technology by proportion of companies likely to adopt them by 2022. So you can clearly see that these are not small numbers. And I'm talking of the period between 2018 and 2022. We are already in 2020, and we are, as we pass through COVID. These numbers, right from 80% to coming down even in terms of 20s, this would have accelerated by now. This is interesting. When you talk of future of education, you will have to look at, okay, I have a degree, I have a professional degree. So these are the roles. The stable roles that will remain are the senior management, the ones that do analytical thinking and reasoning. There'll be new roles that are coming in. That's about data analytics, data scientist, and a whole lot of that do creative problem solving. And there'll be a lot of redundant roles. Now that is where there's a big question mark on, should we really focus on those streams of studies which lead us to think of redundant roles. Like, earlier, maybe a few decades back, people said, do a graduation, you will probably get a bank job to work, as a clerk, rise up the ladder. That won't be a reality going forward. There'll be a lot of roles that will be redundant. I think this is very interesting, and I have dealt in detail in the book. But as you're seeing this is very clear before you that in 3 years' time, we are going to see this shift. There's a lot of redundancy happening on the job front. Now, how does technology or the changes in education impact our profiles? So 59% companies said we will transition our value chain. So what exactly it means that there'll be a whole lot of shift on the way we produce, where we produce, and where we sell. I'm going to give an example towards the end of this presentation on this one. So there will be a reduction of workforce by automation, and the companies are saying 50% companies said we will do that. There'll be a modification of locations of operations. There will be retraining. There will be expansion of workforce. So don't get scared when we say there will be 50% of the companies looking at retrenching. There are decent number of companies, probably high number, which are looking at hiring people with newer skills which are relevant to them. So that is, I think, the most important message, that we don't need to get pessimistic, but we need to get optimistic about the realities and prepare ourselves. Now that is the key. And what is that going to look like? We need to look at that. So look at what are the skills that are today. I mean, like when I say today, it's actually 2018, trending in 2022 and declining in 2022. So it's very clear that, reasoning, problem solving, design thinking are the roles, are the qualifications you would need to handle your roles. So if you're working or if you're studying, you need to probably spend time acquiring these skills besides your degree, unless your degree is in one of these. This is very critical for you to stay relevant to the needs of the time, and post-COVID, all the more. Look at this one. So what does company do to shape this? A very interesting statistics from the World Economic Forum, I have dwelled in detail, even probably analyzed this in the book, is that they will now have more staff with relevant skills. They will retrain the staff for the skills. Of course, people who don't fit in that will have to maybe become redundant. So on one side, you will have augmentation. Other side, you will have a displacement. Now, whether you fall in the augmented category or displacement will depend totally on your education, which means wherever you are, whichever stage of your career you are, you will need to pick up newer skills that are required with time. So look at this important thing. So if you look at the human and machine interface, so where it has happened, reasoning and decision making, machines were 19%. In 2022, they would be 28%. Look at coordinating, developing, managing, and advising. Every particular role you see that they are increasing. Right to the bottom, if you go, information and data processing goes from 47% to 62%. So you will see that the role of machines and man is complementary, but depends on how competitive you are with the machine. So I think that's one of the key messages, that going forward, we are not going to compete with our colleagues. We are going to compete with the best of machines. So for that, we will need to pick up skills which probably we don't have today. And those are the skills I'm going to talk to you ahead. So look at the reskilling needs. So roughly around 54% of all the people in the workforce will need reskilling. They will have reskilling needs. And I analyzed what typical India need would be in terms of reskilling. So we would need a minimum of 3 months of reskilling. I think organizations like McGraw-Hill, which are a predominant player in the education sector, also have onerous responsibility to address this gap, because we would need a continuing reskilling mission, and this probably is not the forte of the government. I think private sector will have to play a key role, and this is a very important message to everyone today probably hearing this session, is that if you have been from the best of institutions, if you are among the highly rated professions, whether you're a lawyer or you're a doctor, you probably need reskilling. And I'll give you an example ahead of, no matter which profession you are, you would still be in competition. So look at these three facts. So Adidas established 2 speed factories, automated, and they moved their production. In 2012, Philips Electronics shifted production from China back to Netherlands. And reason why they shifted? Automation and technology. Now the last one is a very interesting one. I mean, I personally like to quote it because our understanding of how technology impacts has also changed. We used to say that if you are into creativity, reasoning, emotional intelligence, you have less competition. But look at what Spurb an example says. And if you look at the numbers, by next year, 98% of their lawyers will be replaced by robotic lawyers. Lawyers is a very different profession. It needs a different skill set. I mean, they're already using it, they're already using robot lawyers to make decisions on giving loans. Now, this is another interesting example where, related to what I said earlier, is that writing a novel is always being thought about extreme creativity. But the first level of qualifying round was passed by an AI-backed novel. Can you imagine that, a novel written by an artificial intelligence tool? So this is the level where our technology has taken us. So our education will have to map and match the skills that we need to be competitive. Now, this is a very interesting Indian in a very key role in US, and last Sunday we were chatting, and a day later I see that they approved gaming for attention and hyper activated disorder. Now look at the role technology is playing. Now gaming was called an addiction and a mental disorder by ICD-11 or WHO. And I of course differ personally on my opinion on that. Gaming is a wonderful tool for people into IT, for people who are students of today. My son is spending a lot of time on gaming. Probably he would make a career in gaming. And gaming is doing all this stuff. Gaming is helping solve you problems that we probably never thought. In my book, I give examples about how gaming solved problems which was not solved for decades. So is hope your strategy? Given what we saw, can we consider hope as the strategy going forward that, okay, we are hopeful that we will be successful? No. Actually, as a generation, we'll have to touch and transform everything that we come across. So what do we do? This is very important. Earlier we said it was intelligent quotient that matter. If you have high IQ, the world is yours. The science says that IQ only contributes to 15 to 20% of your success, not beyond. Then came the new concept of emotional quotient, that if you have a high emotional quotient, you're better off. That contributes much more than IQ. And if you have a high EQ and an average IQ, you will still do better in life. And of course, I, in my book, go on to give you examples about people with high EQ and average IQ did formally much, much better than others. But what I talk about later is this thing is the new IQ. This is something that we must look at when we talk about the future. So if you are looking at being a student, so you need to look at the new IQ. That is the new intelligence quotient, and that is the imagination quotient. Now I'll give you an example of why it is the most important quality to have. Today we are passing through a crisis, an unprecedented crisis that has never happened in the last 100 years or probably in a written history of ours. The world is in a lockdown. Now, can someone imagine and tell us what the future looks like? So people with a high imagination quotient, whether you work in a company or whether you work as a doctor to treat a patient or whether you work as a policymaker, you need to have a very high imagination quotient for you to imagine the future and then solve problems. Now that's where this is the quality I expect that education system or the people who are looking at reskilling themselves will acquire this quality. And now what will help us acquire this is important. That one important quality we need to give up is we have to think exponentially. We should not copy. The other important point I strongly encourage for those who have kids is, and for the education system, is to develop the quality called curiosity. And this is very important to being an innovator. If you're not curious about things, you're not probably in the fitment of things as we need today. And the next important ability that each one of us should have, whether we're an executive in a company, doing a role in a mid-level or a large company with at the higher level, is ability to ask the right questions. Now, this is something that is the crux of what education system probably delivers. Now, I know that it's a very stressful time for each one of us, whether we are students or professionals, so we'll need to find our stress buster. And I specifically put this, we have seen in the last week of the things that have happened, we all need our stress busters and we have to find one. Also, we need to find our inner calling. That should align with the changing needs of the time. This is important. I would like you to look at these numbers, and most of us would qualify on the higher side. So I've taken an average of 2 hours spent on social media, which all of us are. It is like 1 month a year we are spending on social media. If we are spending 4, which many of us would be, 2 months of a year we are spending on social media. Now this is something we'll have to manage it well. We cannot spend the precious time on things which are not probably productive to us in our daily lives. That's an important message. So what all we need to do? This is important. We saw the changes that have happened. We saw the qualities we would need, but we'll also have to understand where will we be and what will take us to be there. If you want to have a high imagination quotient, the crux of everything. One is reading. You will need to read. If you are in education sector, you need to look probably other sectors. If you are an automobile sector, look at the other sectors. So today it is not in silos. Read diverse, read deep. Learn coding. I remember there was a discussion happening in my education policy committee about three language formula. I said, forget it. The new language is coding. That has to be our second language. The first will be national language, the local language. There has to be coding as our language. So it is proven those who learn coding, they do outstanding. And it is across sectors. So I would strongly encourage, whichever age you are, think about it. Learn a new language. It helps your brain. It helps to improve your EQ and new imagination quotient altogether. So learn a new language. Learn a new instrument. This is very important. See, all these things, your brain will take you to a level which you have not thought. These are the things that we need besides the degrees that we have. And my last message before I end and hand over it to Dr. Lalit, that education is not just for those who are in school, colleges and universities. It's for everyone, because we are all a student of the future. If we refuse to accept this fact, the future will refuse to accept us. Thank you. Dr. Lalit, over to you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Professor Gupta. That was so enriching. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I must tell you, at this point in time, we probably have around 2,500 people with us, on this session. So a lot of people are getting these insights from you. So it's really encouraging. And I have more than 300 questions to pick from. So I probably have just a little less difficult job than you today. So let me give it a try. I have picked up a few questions for you, which I think are directly related to what you mentioned in your talk, and some which you probably did not cover directly, but I think the audience will benefit from your views on those questions.
Sure.
So first question, and time and again this keeps coming, the correlation between education and a job, or the correlation between education and employment. So there are a bunch of questions, there, which if I put all of them together, what they say is, and as you also mentioned, the future of job is very, very different, or the jobs of the future will be very, very different. So how do people really get ready for that world? And related to that, why doesn't the university curriculum or the standard curriculum in a particular course or in a particular program evolve accordingly? What stops us from making those curriculum reforms? And why don't we align these with the jobs of the future? And lastly, on the same note, what's your message for the people coming from non-technical backgrounds? Because time and again we say, AI is coming in big time and jobs will be different. Coding is a third language. What about those people who don't have those privileges, who don't have these experiences with them? How can they get ready for future?
Excellent. So, Lalit, all of us have to understand one thing, that a degree is a basic thing that we have. I don't believe that after your second or third job, anyone looks at your degrees. They will ask you what you can do for us and what you have done in the past. And it is about outstanding work. Now, that having said, why don't education system not change with time? So there is a process involved in changing the curriculum. And let me tell you that we are product of a system that was developed more than decades ago. So that people who are at the helm, they cannot envision, that's the reality, maybe very harsh for some, of what's in store. So we are, as a human being, reactive. We are not proactive. So that's why you saw how education system bought MOOCs, the massive open online courses. Now that is an answer to your first part, that why does the system not change? The degrees are tough to change because there's a whole lot of process. So if you look at, Lalit, when the book came, we talked about putting design thinking in schools, which was probably implemented. But imagine, it's easy to say that we'll have design thinking from 2021, but that means you will need professionals to deliver that. You will need course content. Now that all needs a whole lot of time. That means that you will have to develop it over a year, get it vetted and approved. So that's why education system is typically slow to adopt. But then you have nothing that stops you from following MOOCs, which I think is available from a week to 3 months to 6 months, probably even a year-long course. Now that answers your question of, yes, education system is slow, is catching up though. I think I expect when the new education policy comes in, it will give enough flexibility to autonomous institutions to decide their own curriculum, do their own stuff. But still, it will be over optimistic to expect everything coming from the education system in form of courses which are up to date to 2021. It won't happen. We'll be at least having a lag of 2 to 3 years. So that's why you can use MOOCs. Now the third part of your question, that what do non-technical people do? So I have teacher in my family also. When I used to make presentations for my corporate world, sometimes I used to be told, what all you do every time making PowerPoint presentations. But post-COVID, everyone is doing online classes. Everyone is making presentation for the students. That's a big change. Now, for all of us who are into non-technical, we'll have to find what is the creative solution to being technical or non-technical. And everything has, look at the examples I gave. When Charles Darwin embarked on a journey on Beagle, what was he looking at? And what did he do? The survival of the fittest theory. Was that his qualification? We all have to look at, that's why I said, if you look at these three things, of learning a new language, learning coding is not technical in that sense when you start from the basics, or learning a new instrument, your brain actually starts looking at things which expand your horizons of thinking. So whether you are into technical field or not, today being technical is also your qualification. And I can tell you that any teacher who applies post COVID will, the first thing they will ask, can you take online classes? Do you make presentation? That was never a qualification in the past, but that has become a qualification. So I think all of us, whether we are in arts, commerce or science, will all have to use tools of technology starting from the basics. So I would suggest that please look at enrolling into MOOCs. There are many initiatives of the government. Look at that and try to look at being how much diverse you can become. What are the new skills you can acquire to be competitive? What are new streams? You could actually change your entire field of work. I have changed it over time. All of us change it because at a point in time there's saturation. At the point in time you hit a roadblock. So I would say don't shy of taking risks for change. You will have to change, and if you're prepared, you'll be better off. So don't be rigid on not changing. You will have to look at technology. You will have to look at even changing your streams. That's the fact of life. Lalit?
Yes, Professor Gupta. Sorry, I was on mute. My apologies for that. Getting on to the next question, which is more around policy. It's taking the discussion to the one level higher, if you may so. And there are two or three very important thoughts, that have come out of these questions. One, of course, is what can we learn from others? So with respect to the education policy, is there something specifically that we can learn from China? Because again, the correlation between the jobs and the education, being job ready and what you learn in your courses. China is one country which has demonstrated, to the whole world, and they have literally, stolen jobs from all the countries. We know that. So anything that we can learn from them, one thing. And the related point on there is, how do you see the roles of public and private sector education evolving, and especially with respect to the regulations? So because regulatory changes are so slow in our country to happen, how do you see these things evolving, and any lessons we can learn from elsewhere to make it faster?
So Lalit, I think you picked up a very important point, and I think I went in detail in the book of why China became what it is. I actually went, and surprisingly, the secret lies in education. So China today has, if I remember correctly, around 42% of the investment of the world patent filings. And if you look at point where I cover the innovation part, which has put China at the top. China was an imitator in the beginning. It's no more an imitator, it's an innovator. So what it did was it invested a whole lot on education. All the innovation clusters are in the universities. Now that also connects to your second part of the question. Now, what does the private sector do? So the innovation all over the world is coming from the academic universities. That's where the hubs are. So you will look at a section on innovation, which I cover in the book, where I list why America has ceded its space to China. Because America's investment in tertiary education came down, China's went up. Look at the number of PhDs, and I think that will probably answer every thought that you have. India produces 10,000 PhDs per year, China 30,000, and US 50,000. I think that also gives you the direct relation between the economic muscle and the educational push. So I think we'll have to invest a whole lot on tertiary education. When I say we, don't just think about the government. It's you and me as professionals. I'm still doing my PhD. It's not that I need to, but I think I learn as a student. I have 4 degrees, and I would continue to learn because the world is changing. What I did 20 years back, 25 years back when I started my job is not relevant today. I need to upskill myself. I'm doing that. So I think I've gone in detail to address this issue about how this non-technical people, how the government, in fact, at one stage I say the education policy for Gen Next, India has grown 60% in terms of population from when we liberalized in 1991. A whole lot of things have changed. China today is a big economy because it's big into education. Look at the number of clusters they have made on innovation through the education university. So I think private sector and you as MacGraw are already partnering with the government on many projects. I think more and more people are needed to work with universities, tell them the needs. So there is a suggestion that I make in the book is that we need to identify the local grant challenges. Like Uttar Pradesh will have to figure out what are my grant challenges at the state. Universities and private sectors will have to come together and address this as a part of the education system, as a part of the education mapping, the degree requirement, and even the curriculum. And that's how the future of education and the future of the jobs will be in sync with what we need. Else, we are in a crisis. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Professor Gupta. I mean, the reference to China from imitator to innovator, I think, is a pretty useful one, and we all need to learn from that. Carrying on this policy thing, and getting on from what we need to do to how we need to do, and thinking in terms of quality. There are a bunch of questions. I picked up 3 of them and pulled those together for you. So the first question, it says is, how will you ensure the quality of education in a future world where technically we may just have, an online university where there is no brick and mortar place, where everything is online. So how do you ensure quality of the education there? Related to that, I think there's one gentleman who has asked a question for the present also. They say we have not been able to fix the quality of education issues even in the physical world. How do we ensure that in the digital world? And the third related point is the role of teachers. They're saying, where does the teacher really come into picture? Because regulations are so slow to move. What can teachers do to make life easier for students and make it better for them, help them get job ready faster?
Okay, so on your point of, with too many questions, one thing that happens is I tend to lose out. So can you repeat the first part of the question? Let me answer that. That was important one.
Sure. So it's about the quality of education and how do you really ensure it in the present form and in its future form?
Okay, so clearly that I look at what we do today and I made detailed analysis of where we stand. So one of the things we need to do is move away from this mark system, and to look at competencies. So when you look at the high school level, I would much rather like to see, so at what level of competence you are in. What can you do as a high school graduate? What can you do as a person who just cleared your school? So we should look at competency assessment rather than just marks based on curriculum. Now that's a fundamental shift needed. So the recommendation here is we need to move towards applied sciences. So the challenge that needs to be addressed is that do we still teach the botany, zoology, chemistry in science, or the physics, chemistry, and maths, or do we move towards chemistry, innovation, and management? Now, these are the things education system is expected to change. I hope the new education policy, when it is out, will do. Nevertheless, the parents who have their kids in schools will have to make sure that they also side by side either read books or do MOOCs or open courses to equip themselves to leverage this knowledge into some form of competence. A mere degree is not going to be sufficient. So I think I would say the way to measure it is to measure competency. I would look at universities coming out with patents which are commercially deployable, university having a private industry, which is coming out straight from the students, supported by the startup campus. So otherwise, to me, it's a degree factory. I think in the book delved in detail about how do you manage and measure the outcome from education. So today for me, India's GDP per capita is like $2340 per capita. China should be some 15,000, and US is 67,000. I would look at education system addressing how does India increase the GDP per capita based on what we invest in science, R&D, and innovation. Now, for me, that's the ultimate measure, and how many jobs at the end of the day we create. Because if you have a degree, if you have some competence, you should be able to get a job. You should be able to earn your livelihood. So I think it doesn't appear too complex as long as we have the right objective parameters to assess education.
Right. So, and I think that answers the last part of the question as well. So, how can teachers really play a role in getting that done? Which I believe you answered, by building the right kind of competencies among the students.
I will, Lalit, specifically answer that because in today's context, I would be a little radical to say this, but teacher's job would be more of inspiration rather than, just teaching theory. So teacher's role will be all the more important because yes, technology will play a big role. I can tell you that. That's not something that we can write off. But still you would need a good teacher who figures out which student needs what kind of emotional connect and inspirational support. So the major role of teacher will move towards not just knowledge transfer, but about inspiring students of what to do and how to do. But technology will take a dominant role going forward. That I'm absolutely sure about.
Right. Very nice. Coming to continuing on the technology where you ended, let me pick this one up. So that it says about examination. So what future do you see for examinations, and do you foresee a future in which the other one says examinations will be done completely online? Why it's not happening already?
So I think in my book I did write a chapter on it, and as of now, as thanks to COVID, I have practically seen examinations happening over Google Forms, and with an option of forced submit of those students who don't submit. But yes, technology has capabilities and it's proven. I mean, I give an example in the book where a guy who was weak in maths, his grades improved from 50% to 84% using technology related tools. There was a complete AI backed teacher for him. And because of that, where he was faring poorly in maths, getting below 50, went 84 in 2 years' time. Now that's a practical example before you of what technology can do. So with your pace, Lalit, I can figure out at what level you are. Based on your working on the screen, you cannot even cheat because from your eye movements, I can just figure out that you're not opening a website to find an answer to the question. So technology can solve this problem end to end. It's still a few years away, but it's actually practically being implemented in some parts of the world. Well, that will be a reality. But it's not going to be at scale immediately. What is happening due to COVID is a lot of examinations, tests have moved online. It's happening now. To say that it's not happening would be wrong, but yes, it's not happening all over the country because every student does not have access to technology or computer. I would say that as a for a practical purpose. But yes, those students and institutes which use technology, I have seen, I think yesterday, a complete class giving a test and the teacher forcing a fourth submission because the time was over. Now that's their capability without using any advanced tools. So I think it's happening today. So technology is going to be used for examinations, and that's going to be even for teaching, not just for examinations.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Gupta. And if I may just add to that, we do have such tools available. In fact, McGraw-Hill is one of the leading companies, as everybody knows. We do have classroom tools which are used for conducting examinations, just like you said, where there are proctoring tools built in the system, and you can schedule an examination, and even the tool can help the examiner in evaluating the papers as well. So you're right, they're not as widely available in our part of the world as needed because of all kinds of technology limitations. But tools do exist, and they're going to go. They're going to get adopted, and they're going to get better as we get along. So I quite agree with you. Thank you for reinforcing that point. Yeah, so I realize we have last 4 minutes, and I've got 2 more questions for you. The final 2 one. I'll leave the more interesting one for later. But very quickly, a very interesting question. Do you agree that there is a negative correlation between education and entrepreneurship?
So, this is a very loaded question. Whosoever had put it, really appreciate that. I cannot be conclusive to answer that in this call. But yes, in the book, I very clearly said one thing that, we have seen the case where people have built companies and they have sold out at decent valuations. Which brings me to the point that education system had somewhere failed to build probably a mindset in people for creating value and not creating valuations. To that extent, this person who asked the question is very right. But if the education system actually inculcated entrepreneurship in people and a mindset, there would be a direct correlation in terms of higher the education, higher the level of entrepreneurship. So by the way, all the 3 examples I gave you, whether it was Steve Jobs or it was Elon Musk or it was Bill Gates, or for that matter, anyone, they all qualified to be in the best and the biggest institutes. So that means degree wise they would have been less, but education wise they were pretty knowledgeable enough to drive entrepreneurship. Whether the question could have been the formal degrees and entrepreneurship, I would agree. But education they have, probably they knew the field pretty well to change it. So there is a direct relationship. The higher the education, the better or the more successful the entrepreneurship. Now, what do you qualify as education is a subjective or objective question for us to consider.
Yeah, very, very rightly said. If somebody could start something, think of it and start working on that, they got the education, right? So we have to get it in that context. Okay, so that brings me to the last question, Professor Gupta, which I want to ask you, not as a policymaker, but more as a parent yourself. And I know you got kids at home. So when we talk about this digital transformation and everything going online and kids studying online and looking at computer screen and tablets all the time, so what do you see? Did you see 2 things? One is kids getting distracted, and number 2, do you think there are going to be harmful effects on the health of these students and teachers, for that matter, who are spending so much time on their monitors and devices?
The clear medical answer is yes. There is no 2 thoughts about it, and I'm not going to defend it. Simply because there is a need doesn't mean that it is right. And if more people are doing it, doesn't become right. It's wrong, it's wrong. So yes, to a point, let me say that for everything, there is always what you should do and what you should not do. While I was at the ministry, I got a document made which said what students should do and what students should not do. It was released by HRD and the health minister, and there has to be a limitation of screen time. I see today kids are, kids means, and I'm talking of real small kids, less than 3 years, who are on the tablet, bending their neck, spending hours. So I'm sometimes thinking, what will happen to the C4 and C5 after some time? Will they be born like bent necks? Is there a way out? So I think the answer lies in balancing it along with practicing certain yoga, certain postures, and probably practicing a downtime, that after how many minutes you should stop watching, how many times you should blink your eyes and exercise, and what you should do to make sure that you don't have dry eyes, besides problems with your posture and back. So I think we will have to come out with guidelines. And Lalit, here is where I request you, being a leader in education, is probably help create guidelines of what people should do using technology tools. I think a very important question, and rightly the last one, so that we need to define the do's and don'ts, and what are the ways that you can probably address the negative effects of overdoing the things using technology. So yes, the answer is we will have to work around it. We cannot be away from it, but we certainly can be away for a small while we spend our time on it.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Gupta. The right answer is balancing. Like for rest everything in life, the right balance is the key. So really appreciate that. And that brings me to the end of, nearly to the end of this session. I have to really say a big thanks to you, Professor Gupta, for sharing all your insights and also highlighting those so important findings that you had from your research and which you have published in the book. For our listeners, I mean, if they're interested, this book, Your Degree is Not Enough, is available on Amazon, is available as a Kindle version as well, those who want to read an ebook. So if you want to go through more details on this and understand Professor Gupta's vision in greater details, please do try these books. And for Professor Gupta, I mean, I can't conclude this session without giving a quotation from what you said once, right? If in health there is wealth, in education there is wealth and prosperity. Only if we get this right as a country, as a society, I think we all can be more prosperous and not just wealthy. So this is so much rightly said by you, and I hope people see that degree is just not education. Education is much more than a degree, as you have covered in such a great detail, and that education is what brings wealth and prosperity both. So I had to share that quote here to really sum it up in my own way. So thank you again, Professor Gupta. That was indeed a very, very good discussion with you. And lastly, for our listeners, there are a couple of small things I just wanted to say. There was such a large discussion around technology, and Professor Gupta mentioned about coding as the third language. So those of our listeners who are interested in learning that third language, we have the next webinar coming up on 7th of July, and that will be on Java. So those of you who are interested in that, learning more about Java or how to learn Java or how to teach Java or how can that play a role in that, please register for that webinar. It's going to be as interesting as this one. And lastly, those of you who have been asking about certificates, be assured your certificates will reach all of you. You must have given your email ID, so they will reach your email ID pretty soon. And the recording of this session will also be available on McGraw-Hill's YouTube channel. For those who had any technical difficulty or who could not join the session for whatever reason, can always have a look at it at YouTube channel that McGraw-Hill has, and they can benefit from Professor Gupta's insights there. So that's about it from my end, and thank you so much everybody for joining in today, and a very big thanks to Professor Gupta for taking time out for this important session. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.